I think that one of the things that the present economic challenges has created for many churches is that churches like ours, as well as others, are having to revisit compensation packages, not just for pastors, but for employees as well. Giving for most congregations has been on the decline since the market crash. And even though the economy, I was reading an article a couple of days ago that says that jobs are back at the 2008 level, even though that may be happening, we're not feeling it in the offering plate. And so one of the things that we've had to do is continuously revisit what we are doing, and also revisit the work that employees are doing, as well as the work that pastors are doing. And so it's a delicate balance between trying to make sure that you adequately compensate people for the work that they do, and also compensate them for the competencies that they possess. But at the same time, if you have other responsibilities such as a mortgage and a large light bill and other fixed expenditures, it's not quite as easy to be as flexible. So I think those types of things, there are fixed variables, and then there are other variables that play a tremendous role in the way that churches possibly look at compensation. From my own personal perspective, we have a human resources ministry team who work as advocates, not only for the pastor, but also for employees. And one of the things that they periodically do is a compensation study to determine if we are on par with other pastors and ministers of music, for example, directors of worship and arts, because we don't want to underpay people, but we also want to be good stewards of the resources that we have. That has worked that has worked well for us. And also our director of finance plays a very strong role in making recommendations in terms of how we have to manage what's coming in the offering plate. The church, unfortunately, is not like a for-profit entity where you have a product that you sell. We rely on the free will gifts and contributions of persons that sit in our pews each week. And of course, what happens in the life of the persons in the pew is a macrocosm of the microcosm in our churches. So if the people are struggling, the church struggles as well. One other thing I've observed, though, is that when people get to a certain level in reducing their income, it's difficult sometimes, in reducing their giving, I should say, it's difficult sometimes to revert back to previous levels. Because even though some people have now, that were previously unemployed, are now employed, they're still playing catch up as well. If you've been unemployed for 2 or 3 years, it takes a while to regain the traction so that you can begin to be as generous as you once were. And of course, the element of fear plays a role. I say often that people have not stopped spending, but they have made some adjustments in their giving. You can look at any shopping mall and tell that people are still spending, or at least window shopping. So I think that it depends to a large extent on that particular congregation. As I think I mentioned earlier, we are a Baptist congregation, and even though we're affiliated with the Progressive National Baptist Convention, we're not a connectional church, or the denomination does not set a compensation structure. It is determined autonomously based on whatever type of compensation team that their church may put in place. Sometimes it's done by deacons and trustees. In our case, it is a partnership between the human resources team who confers with the finance team, because they know what comes in and they can tell us better than anybody what's realistic. Even if the compensation study says this is what we should be paying, if what we're bringing in does not match that, we have to do what is best, because we have to also offer ministry and take care of the fixed expenditures of the church as well. I think that a pastor needs to consider all the things that they would consider if they were working any job. Pastoring is not a second-class occupation, and the scripture is very clear that those that rule well should be counted worthy of double honor. So I think that the things that pastors talk about should include not only base salary, but housing allowance. They should also talk about benefits, health insurance. And I know that in this particular season, health insurance has been a volatile type of subject, but a pastor cannot really give himself or herself as fully to the ministry as they need to be if they're encumbered by worry about what will happen if their health fails, or if they have children or a spouse, the health of their children. So I think that the same types of realities that everybody else faces, pastors need to also consider including those things in their compensation. Not only that, but continuing education, conferences, because professional development is important, a book allowance, and even a car allowance should be included. Now, whether or not a person gets all those things is at the discretion of their congregation. But I do think that the pastor needs to consider realistically what it will take for him or her to be as effective as they can be as the senior leader of that particular congregation, and have that discussion. Some things come incrementally. When I first started pastoring here, I did not get a housing allowance. I just received a flat salary. But as the church began to grow and the church's revenue began to increase, there were other benefits that were added. When I was working on my doctoral degree, the recommendation was made by the human resources team that for that season, the church would compensate me for my travel and also for my book expenses, and also if there was a need to help even with my tuition expenses and the money was available, that recommendation was made. So again, it still depends on that particular congregation, but I think that the pastor does herself or himself a disservice if they do not bring the conversation up, or if someone does not bring that conversation up. I think one of the things that has to happen is that people in the pews really don't understand what it takes to run a ministry. And I think that pastors have to be clear about communicating that. The risk of doing that, though, is that people begin to think that you're begging or that all you want is their money. But we have to challenge people and to a higher standard of accountability because it's really about stewardship. It's about management of the resources that God has given us so that the church can fulfill its mission. And I think that pastors, and in general, there are some that don't necessarily shy away from it, but I think many pastors are somewhat reticent about talking about money to congregations because we don't want to be viewed as people that are just preaching for money or that we're just begging for money. But we do have to communicate, and we do have to be unapologetic in helping congregants to understand what it takes to run a ministry. I think the other thing that helps, which is something that we've tried to practice here for many years, is to practice accountability. To provide, we are a 501c3. Our church has a 501c3 status. So each year we publish an annual report. And we also do a congregational meeting every year to let members know what the money is going for, what the monies or the resources that they are investing in the congregation is being used to do. We also mail out financial statements every quarter, just as a part of our accountability, so that people can see what they are giving each quarter, and with the hope that when they look at it and say, maybe, well, I've been going to church for 3 months and I put $300 in church for a quarter, it may spur them to give. But more importantly, it's about accountability for us as a church and helping people to see where their money is going. I think the other thing that helps too is when you have members in the congregation who believe in the vision of the church, who also believe in who have been impacted by that congregation, share their testimonies. During the offering time, sometimes here at our church even, we've had persons who have taken the challenge to be generous givers, taken the challenge to be tithers, to share their testimonies about how giving has impacted their lives. But I think the most important thing is to try to cultivate a culture of generosity. And that's not something that happens overnight. It takes time. you have to preach it, you have to cast the vision, you have to say it over and over again, because we live in a culture where people still believe that what they have is theirs. And again, it goes back to stewardship, but it's more than stewardship. It's about generosity. It's about knowing that everything I have is a sacred trust from God. It's a gift from God. And that what God has given me and what God has entrusted to me is also, God also expects me to use that to build God's kingdom. So I would say culture, changing the culture is probably one of the biggest things, because most people that come into our congregations have not been oriented toward generosity, particularly if they don't have any history with a church at all. So as I said before, it's something you have to teach. You have to cast vision. You have to have workshops. You bring in people to teach. There are programs also that help people to get out of debt. That's another point that I need to say. It's hard for people to think about helping the church when they're struggling to pay their own bills. The last thing that they're worried about is the church's light staying on if they're trying to keep theirs on. So in addition to changing the culture, I think also providing the assistance to congregants to help them in terms of their own financial situation and empowering them with information and education to help them financially is important too. Because as the strain is lifted off the people in your congregation, the strain is lifted off the pastor, because then people are free. They're in a better position, I'll say. It doesn't always follow that because they have more money, they will give more. Because the truth of the matter is that when we look at our records sometimes, we find that the people who have the least to give are often the ones who practice the greater generosity. So it may not necessarily follow that way in terms of a formula, but I do think there's a certain benefit in empowering people with education. A colleague of mine, Dr. Floyd Flake, who pastors Allen Cathedral in Jamaica, New York, has often had this conversation with me that one of the things that's missing in seminaries is courses on financial literacy. Because in essence, pastors are called to function as CEOs, quote unquote, and they're basically running an operation in an organization, and they don't come to the table unless they've worked in another field with that kind of background. Fortunately for myself, I worked as a director of admissions for a community college before I started pastoring a church. So I had experience in not only developing budgets, preparing budgets, even defending budgets, because we had to defend our budgets and the amounts of money that we were requesting for our departments before a council at the college. But not everybody comes into ministry with that background. And so when a pastor walks into a church to pastor a church and they don't have any literacy in terms of financial stewardship, it can be very disconcerting. And then, as I mentioned earlier, with the added pressure of feeling guilty about asking for money or having to raise the budget. You don't want to feel like you're the chief fundraiser, but you do need to have some understanding of what it takes to run a ministry. So I think it's an excellent idea. I think it's a wonderful paradigm shift. I think it's very pioneering, and I think it's going to really benefit preachers and pastors that are coming out of seminary, because it's something that all of us have to deal with. And it's something that, even though a lot of pastors won't say, unless we are blessed to have churches with lots of income and lots of money and these huge endowments, it's something that keeps pastors up at night.